Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Credera's Summer 25 Salesforce Release Highlights webinar. I'm Keir Bowden. If I could just get a thumbs up or similar from someone in the chat to show that to say that you've seen my screen move, just to make sure that everything is going through correctly, that'd be really helpful. I'm Keir Bowden. I'm your independent Salesforce specialist, and I'm the guest host for today. Aiming to prove that guest host is the best host. So here's the agenda. You might notice a slight change to the last few release webinars. So previously, Agentforce or AI Cloud, etc., as the name has changed, had a section to itself, but it's that functionality or that kind of capability is now embedded across so much of the Salesforce product set that we felt it made more sense to include the Agentforce features and the AI features in the specific topic areas. So you'll now see it striped across most of the deck. So without further ado, let's get started on some fond farewells and see which features have had their chips. In the interest of transparency, I'll also point out that all the images that you see on the divider slides were generated through artificial intelligence. That was ChatGPT 4.0. And I say that for a reason, which will become clear a bit later on. Okay, not too much retiring this release, or not too much called out for retirement, because they're not all retiring this release. Decision optimization in Einstein Discovery goes in a couple of days. This is an interesting one because there's a beta feature that clearly didn't cut it, and I think that's a timely reminder that we should all only make purchasing decisions based on the generally available features rather than the beta features that look cool but might not actually make it into production. Platform API versions 21 through 30 retire as part of an update enforced in this release. So this has been publicized for quite a while, so I can't imagine it will come as a surprise to anyone. If it is coming as a surprise and you think you've got some of those versions in use, then you've got a few days left to get on top of that. 2026 won't be such a happy Valentine's Day for legacy chat. That's being retired in favor of messaging for in-app and web. And in summer 26, so in 1 year's time, the Einstein Activity Capture Activity 360, this is a really tough one to say, Activity 360 reporting, activity metrics, and the activity analytics dashboard retire. And I feel I should say analytics a few more times. Because basically starting in that release, Einstein Activity Capture can store email as task and email message records, so you don't need that other those specialist things. You can simply enable syncing of email as a Salesforce activity for Einstein Activity Capture, and then you report on it as you would any other Salesforce object. So this is one that's being retired, but things are getting better. And finally, Salesforce Outlook retires in December 2027. This is another one that's been coming for some time, so again, shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. The good news is here that if it is a surprise, you've still got 18 months to get yourself organized. Okay, so next up, some general features that apply across the entire Salesforce application. So no release webinar would be complete without the supported browsers, even though I can't really remember the last time this changed, probably iPadOS. As usual, latest Chromes, Edge Chromium, Firefox, and Safari will work for most scenarios outside of Safari not supporting the classic console. And not surprisingly, the only supported browser when running the Lightning experience on iPadOS is Safari, made by Apple. Salesforce Go, this is a new discovery and setup hub in Lightning Setup. So access from the gear icon, and then rather than navigating around different pages to set features up, you can evaluate and easily set up features that are available in your Salesforce edition from one guided workspace. And once you click into a feature or a feature set, you can then choose to either start setting it up or learn more about it by watching videos or earning trailhead badges, for example. So clearly Salesforce are trying to drive adoption, trying to get people to use all the capabilities that are there by making it easier. This is a good thing. The setup pages haven't had a lot of love for a number of years now, so it's nice to see there being a more modern approach to this. Bunch of updates being enforced and enabled this release. I won't read them all out. Where they're important, they're called out in this deck. But again, interesting that there aren't a huge amount of these going on at the moment. I should also say I'm not really sure what the difference between enforced and automatically enabled is, but basically that just means that functionality is going to apply. And then in the next release, there's a few more. Again, this is probably a smaller amount than we'd normally see. This would normally fill a whole page. So there's a few less release updates currently planned for winter 26. Also, when we're looking ahead at some of these release updates, be aware it's not unusual for these to be pushed out or cancelled entirely. Okay, moving on to the next topic of analytics. Agentforce comes to analytics with Tableau Next, which is also integrated with Data Cloud. So this provides integration and interpretation and semantic layer, which basically means that users and agents see the same harmonized and consistent model no matter where the data lives. And you've also got visualizations from metrics backed by semantic models. So that lets you build charts based on governed business metrics, respecting things like data lineage, permissions, and metric logic. So a lot more control there. There's also asset management, deployment, a new marketplace to buy and sell assets and the like, an integrated action layer, and also streamlined setup. You can find out an awful lot more. This is a very whistle stop at the short link shown. As usual, don't worry about capturing any URLs because the deck will be shared with all attendees. Deck and recording will be shared with everyone in a day or two. A beta feature from the last release that's made it generally available is that you can now choose to refresh individual dashboard components rather than the entire dashboard. So if you've only got one small area that you're interested in, you can just pull in the latest data that you need rather than having to take the hit for everyone. And you can configure a single email address to send all report and dashboard subscription notifications rather than having them all sent out as different users. So it's always a good thing to have consistency on these type of notifications, and it also helps people identify that those emails are safe to open, safe to interact with. So you configure these via the reports and dashboard user interface settings via these two settings here, and those need to be all verified org-wide email addresses in order for them to all be able to be sent as that particular user. CRM Analytics gets a few tweaks in this release. You can configure list and toggle widgets for navigation. You can define custom headers in a repeater widget rather than having to use the standard. And you can also add sorting to a repeater widget. You configure the fields to sort on, and then your users can click to sort from field headers. The table widget now supports customizable tooltips. So rather than simply repeating the name of the column, which is obviously really helpful, you can choose to show the user something more meaningful when they hover over. And you can now allow widget queries to apply external filters. Next up, customization, where we have another great set of enhancements, a lot of them courtesy of Cheryl Feldman, our favorite product manager, and her team. So you can update object permissions on all custom profiles and permission sets from a single place. So if you navigate to the setup functionality, pick the object that you're interested in, so account in this case, choose the object access menu from the left-hand sidebar. You've then got tabs for permission sets, permission set groups, and profiles, and you click the edit button, and then you can go in and you can make the changes that you need to make all in a single place rather than having to navigate around quite a number of screens. That kind of thing is really, really helpful, I think. I've had to add in new object access to organizations with over 100 profiles in the past, and navigating around all the different pages and clicking the buttons really did take forever. And also, it was easy to get it wrong because I had to click through so many pages. So it's really good to see this kind of functionality, to see these things becoming a bit more workspace-like than simple, relatively straightforward setup pages. In a similar vein, you can now manage permissions in the permission set summary page. So you can select the permissions by clicking the checkbox on the left and remove them through the grayed out remove button you can see there, or you can click the add button and include some more. And this applies to user, object, field, and the various other tabs that you can see here, those permissions. So again, lot more ability to manage everything from a single place rather than having to navigate around loads of pages. And yet another one. So you can now manage the included permission sets in a permission set group summary page. So you can inspect which permissions are conferred by the group. You can select existing permissions and remove those permission sets rather, and remove those, or you can click the add button and quickly add more. And one more, you can manage the permission sets the user assigned to a user and the groups and queues that they're a member of, all from the summary page again. So as I say, what's great about these enhancements, setup pages, moving more to workspaces rather than having to navigate around, 5 or 10 pages to do something. You can land on a single page, make all the changes in one place. So hopefully we'll be seeing a lot more of this in the future. Maybe some of them outside of the user management. Maybe some of the other product managers will get involved in this as well, which would be nice. Some other changes in the customization space. Prompt Builder, if you're using that for Agentforce, now supports external objects. So you basically use a similar syntax to standard and custom objects. As far as you're concerned, it's not really any different. But do note that to preview the prompt, the external object must have a name field. Owner-based sharing rules can run asynchronously after a group membership or user role change if the platform determines it will run better, it will perform better. So previously these were always applied asynchronously, always applied synchronously, but they may not be going forward. And you aren't going to know until you make that change. There's not an awful lot you can do about it apart from be prepared that that might be the case. And for those with huge volumes of data, if you're hitting problems with a deployment involving converting a custom field type, and that fails with the error, the deployment failed because we couldn't change the data type of one or more custom fields, then that means, or that may be because you've impacted more than 85 million records. So you can find out what to do next at the short link shown if you're impacted by this, but I'd also recommend reviewing your governance approach, because changing a field that impacts 85 million records should have been picked up a little bit earlier than actually at deployment time. And we all knew this had to come. Agentforce gets its own marketplace with the Agent Exchange. So when you navigate to the App Exchange, you'll see there's now App Exchange or Agent Exchange. You've got a tab effectively there. So if you click on that, then you'll be taken to the Agent Exchange homepage with lots of lovely solutions from Salesforce and from partners. And then when adding topics or actions when configuring an agent, you've got a new element on there, so you can create a new action, you can add from Asset Library, or you can add from the Agent Exchange to pull that in directly. Okay, next topic, my personal favorite as always, development. There's a new error message that you might see with your Lightning Web components. This is to do with stricter access checking, and this is no component of module named whatever found. So basically, if you see this, you need to check your imports and make sure that what you're trying to import, you are actually allowed to import. So if this is related to an ISV component, you want to check with the provider that you should have access, and you do have access. And if it's a Salesforce component, then this message means that you shouldn't be trying to do that, so you need to remove the reference. The Lightning base components documentation has been updated. This contains more guidance on usage and the benefits of using the Lightning base components to customize your apps and components. It's also standardized the name to Lightning base components. At times this has been called things like base Lightning components as well, but it should always be called Lightning base components going forward. Hopefully that consistency will pay off. And the internal DOM structure of Lightning web components is changing again. So native shadow DOM support is being introduced for the Lightning tree grid, the Lightning user consent cookie, and the Lightning quick action panel components. So if you have any tests that rely on the internal structure, then these are likely to fail. And the solution to that is you should stop relying on the internal structure. Salesforce say don't do that, and it's always been subject to change. When accessing the API, you should switch to using the My Domain login URL rather than anything instance specific. This prevents disruption in the event that your org is migrated to a different instance, which does seem to happen a fair bit these days. This is a release update, which is applied in summer 25. You can now enable debug logs during a metadata deployment. Something I've needed a few times in the past when I've got unit test failures because there was something specific to the org, but I didn't know because I couldn't see what was actually going on. I couldn't see any of the detail. So you can now turn on debug logs. You enable this either from the UI via Apex settings or via the metadata API. You do need an active debug log trace flag, and you should be aware that it will slow down deployments, because if you've ever turned debug logs on anything, you'll know that it takes a bit longer because it's writing out so much information. As mentioned earlier, API versions 21 through 30 are retiring. Any integrations relying on these versions will fail. This isn't, it carries on, but it's unsupported. They will error and say they're not available. If you enable the synchronous compile on deploy setting in a sandbox, you will now see a banner on the deployment status page to remind you that you've done that. And finally, if you're lucky enough to ever be selected to be part of a pilot, you can now allow your developers to deploy and retrieve pilot metadata. I don't think I've ever been lucky enough to get on a pilot, so I'm not really sure what the behavior was before, but if you couldn't use metadata, sounds like it was probably quite painful. Apex can now evaluate dynamic formulas in template mode using the new parse as template method. So this allows you to use merge field syntax rather than having to manually concatenate strings through functions, etc. If you're interested in the detail of that, I wrote a blog post about it when the release first went into preview, which you can find at the short link shown there. So flow builder, there's a new time data type. So this is for when the time of day matters, but the actual date doesn't. So you don't have to use a date time and just disregard the date bit. So it gives you a bit more accuracy around that and a bit more consistency, which is good. You can view pick list selections as labeled pills rather than the API names shown previously. Quite useful because the API names can often reflect what something was historically going to be used for rather than what you really want to use it for now. And you can now intentionally select an entire resource rather than clicking out the input area without selecting a field like we used to have to. So when you go for the resource, you've got the entire resource option there. The Flow Builder Einstein panel has a larger, more user-friendly interface that you can drag anywhere on the screen now and display in conjunction with an element configuration panel rather than having to switch between the two. So to open and close the panel, you click on the Einstein button marked with a 1 here. Click the dots marked with a 2 you can see there to drag and drop the panel elsewhere. And use the icons marked with a 3 to clear the history and pin the Einstein panel. When testing flows, you've now got the capability for negative assertions with the has error operator, so you can actually engineer an error scenario and check that that happened. Really vital part of testing. You can use this on create, update, and delete records plus action elements. Good to see flow tests getting some love there. You can now save existing flows as a template. And also, if your flow involves external systems, then there's a more prominent add asynchronous path toggle that will remind you that it's mandatory for you to add an asynchronous path. Another beta feature from the last release becomes generally available as screen flows can now trigger flow actions. Flow screen actions. So this allows auto launch flows to be run when an input value changes. So previously the user had to change the input value and then click a button. So you configure this in the screen elements properties. You open the configure screen action section, and then in the set action run settings section, another one that's hard to say, you set the action's input values and optionally configure if the screen action should only run when the screen is loaded for the first time. Another little feature that I really like is the ability to customize the width of screen components and record fields, even if they aren't in section columns. So you'll see that even though they're not in section columns, you still express the width as a number of columns in a section. So 3 of 12 would be a quarter of the available white space there. You can also control the vertical position relative to other components on the screen via the vertical alignment. So a bit more control over layout, always good. You can add icons to choices via the new Choose Icon button in the Customize User Interface section. So once you've decided on that you want an icon, you then choose from the standard, doc type, or utility Lightning Design System icons. And then you can use the icon in screen components like Choice Lookup or Visual Picker. Just gives the user a better idea of what you're asking them to do there. Another feature that I really like, another small thing, but again, I think the layout improvements on this are nice. You can now configure screen flow choices to display as tiles rather than making users scroll through drop-down options. So you configure their properties like size, shown here with the 1, whether multi-select is allowed, shown here with 2, etc. And then at runtime, users get a nice list of a simple palette of options to click on rather than having to scroll through drop-down options. Obviously, that isn't going to scale well if you've got 100 in there, so you only want to use it where there's a small number of options. Flow testing and debugging. So the flow debugging experience now includes element level summaries to help you understand exactly what happened at each point. So for example, if you've got an update records element, then you'll be able to see how many records were actually affected. So this is something that was previously available for marketing flows. It's made its way into all the flows that are available. Debugging is now supported for data graph triggered flows. You can either choose the data model object or you can manually enter field values, and the same applies to event triggered flows. And you can now send test email and SMS sends with test messages. Now test email and SMS sends with test messages. But you do need to configure test email addresses or phone numbers in order to be able to do this. A few enhancements to flow approval processes. If you haven't looked at flow approval processes and you're still using the old style approval processes and you're finding that some of the complexity is difficult to represent there, well worth a look. So there's a few enhancements to it in this release. You can run a flow approval process from a flow using the new request approval action from any flow that supports asynchronous paths. Delegates can now see and complete open approval items in the work guide. You can add a recall path to a flow approval process to allow submitters to cancel their approval request. That's quite necessary, I think, quite a vital capability. And you can create an approval process directly from the approvals app rather than having to build a flow manually using a wizard-based tool. But this only allows you to go up to 3 levels of approval. It does support final actions and it does support the recall path. And a few final changes for flows. You can preview screen flows for different screen sizes to understand the user experience across devices. And there's a bunch of updates to actions. You can, as mentioned, you can create a flow approval process and call it. And the send email process has a bunch of, send email action has a bunch of changes. You can create email content, select a template, use the CC and BCC collection, and the sender and content inputs have been grouped into sections to make it easy to understand what's going on. And finally, the log email on send and the add threaded token options are only displayed when appropriate. So if you haven't selected a record, it won't ask you if you want to do all the things that are associated with sending a record. Okay, next up we have Experience Cloud. Aura and Lightning Web Runtime sites first, as usual. For enhanced Lightning Web Runtime sites connected to Data Cloud, you can now use custom data spaces to partition your data. So previously, this only worked with a standard data space, which meant if you had data needing segregating from different users, etc., you needed multiple Data Cloud instances. Whereas now you don't. Use a custom data space and control who has access to those via permission sets. You can let LWR site users know their session will end in 5 minutes, so they can make sure to save their work, assuming they're paying attention. And in Aura sites, record field information icons are now displayed in grey, regardless of the site's theme. But when a user hovers over them, they'll change to the site's action colour. The new record list component for LWR sites helps your visitors view, search, and sort their records, and it includes various properties for customization and styling. If you haven't used Lightning Web Runtime sites before, then because they're built on Lightning Web components, they were effectively, when they started, you had to build out quite a lot of the functionality yourself. They didn't have as many standard components as the Aura sites did, but that's now starting to be rectified, and we're starting to see more and more with each release. It will take a little while yet to get up to feature parity, but it's good to see that we're not all having to build our own record list components anymore. It's much better if Salesforce provide a standard one that we can customize. Going back in the other direction, the modernized record experience comes to Aura sites. So this is an enforced update this release. And this updates the create record form, the record banner, and the record detail pages to use Lightning Web Components technology. There's also a bunch of relatively minor changes to the styling. I won't read all these out as I don't have anything to add to them, and I'm sure you can all read as well as I can. And when we share the deck, you can read them again if you're that interested. And finally, for Experience Cloud, security and sharing. So only users with verified email addresses will be able to create new sites. This ensures that the welcome emails come from a verified address and don't appear to be spam, or don't set off any spam triggers. Lightning Web Runtime sites get enhanced security with the Salesforce Content Delivery Network. This provides a defense against malicious crawlers, bots, scrapers, and distributed denial of service attacks, always a good thing. But legitimate bots and crawlers like search indexers and threat monitors are still allowed access. And finally, you can now use Flow, the single sign-on registration handlers for Aura, Lightning Web Runtime, and Visualforce sites, whereas previously you could only do this with Apex. Moving on to Marketing Cloud, which is a lengthier section than normal, I would say this release rather. So starting with Marketing Cloud Account Engagement, formerly known as Pardot for those of us who've been around for a while. You can access custom URL activity information from Data Cloud to generate more nuanced segments and to further personalize campaigns and account engagement. And you can also use segment members from Data Cloud in up to 100 dynamic lists per business unit, which is up from 25 in the previous release. You can reach more contacts by connecting a WhatsApp business account. And once you've done that, you can access WhatsApp marketing channels through Marketing Cloud. If you're seeing configuration issues in Optimizer that aren't relevant for your marketing strategy, you can now dismiss those and just focus on the items that matter. The failed email sends report now has more information, including the failure reason, the timestamp, and the related prospect. And if you find you have bot-like prospects who are generating a huge amount of activity information, you can pause tracking on their activities so that you don't impact performance. And you can also then manually delete those activities or automatically clear them all down when you unpause tracking for the prospect. Marketing Cloud Engagement, formerly known as Marketing Cloud. So as usual, this doesn't feature in the release notes, as the release takes place over the next few weeks. So the way this works is Salesforce want to run a webinar to take an in-depth look at the new features, and they announce this in a page in the release notes, which if you follow that short link, that'll allow you to follow the page and to keep in the know so that when it's scheduled, you'll get details about it. Marketing Cloud next, which is formerly known as Marketing Cloud Growth. So there's quite a lot of changes in this release, so settle in for a few slides. And remember that this has only been around for a few releases, so a lot of these changes are to start to get closer to feature parity with some of the other marketing offerings. So Einstein can pick up some of the work by creating reports and automating flows based on predictive engagement. You can also build a data graph for Einstein send time optimization, although note that you would need to disable and re-enable Einstein send time optimization in marking setup in order to be able to do this. The get score for record ID Agentforce action retrieves the engagement and fit scores for a lead, a contact, or a prospect record, and you can build a custom campaign without using a quick start option using the build your own tab in the Let's Build Your Campaign page. You can manage flows directly from campaign records as long as the flow has 5 elements or fewer. You can add messages and wait elements and configure things like Einstein send time optimization and tracking through that mechanism. If you click send email in any lead or contact list view, you can send to the entire list by selecting the marketing email option, then following the instructions in the prompts that you are shown. So Salesforce does the hard yards and creates the campaign, flow, and audience section for you. The new HTML code view for emails allows you to add custom HTML to your emails, and the improved data sources tab allows you to view and manage data sources before publishing an email, and to view all the available data sources, including the default data graph or unified individual. The repeater component allows you to display related content like recent purchases or popular products in a consistent format, so as cards, as a list, or as a custom layout. You just connect the repeater to a data source and use merge fields to display the information that you want to show your users. You can personalize emails with dynamic images and also customize the button experience for each audience using a merge field or a dynamic URL for an image component, source, or button action. Data source objects in forms now support time, date time, and number field types, and the text area long now renders a larger input area with a draggable corner for users who need more or maybe less space. Marketers can now recommend services, I should say personalization rather than personalization, nice little typo in there. Basically, they can recommend services, products, and other items using these recommendations. So they simply connect that to the repeater component to show a collection of recommended products tailored to each recipient. You can now collect consent data with event and data cloud triggered flows and update unified individuals' consent information using the create consent action. Previously, this required an event triggered flow with a form submission event trigger. But it doesn't any longer. And also consent input files now support a country code, which is useful if people want to consent to certain things, but not others. Some reporting enhancements. Marketers can now track and report on custom links to pages on external websites and attribute this tracking data to campaigns. They can also get improved deliverability metrics for marketing performance dashboards and improve page view metrics for their external website tracking. And links to external websites can be tracked back to a specific source, such as an email or SMS. And when a visitor gives consent to tracking, their initial page view data is now included in the reports. The deliverability dashboard improves monitoring of email performance. It allows marketers to analyze their top and bottom performing emails and understand the reasons why emails failed to be delivered. The performance dashboard tracks the performance of your messaging links and landing pages directly from the content records. And you can also evaluate how dynamic content interactions perform and gain valuable insights into audience interactions. And there's a few setup and administration enhancements too. The data kit installation and update process is improved to make it easier to set up messaging channels. Detailed instructions have been added for creating messaging requests in specific countries. And like Experience Cloud, a custom data cloud data space can be designated for Marketing Cloud rather than having to use the default data space and multiple data clouds, etc., etc. And Marketing Cloud now supports identity licenses, so your users can be added to your marketing team without needing the expense of a full Salesforce license. So quite a lot going on in the marketing space there, but now we move on to mobile, which is the opposite. The reason I mentioned that these images are generated through AI was for this one in particular. So with this, the prompt was basically show me someone accessing records from a database on their mobile device. I never mentioned Salesforce, And look, based on my history with ChatGPT, it knows that I'm a Salesforce person, so it's given me a bunch of records that are all from the Salesforce Developer Edition. So Edge Communications, Burlington Textiles Corp, we're all very familiar with those. Very interesting, I thought that was. AI is definitely understanding what I'm doing and making appropriate decisions for me. So anyway, there's only one change to the mobile app, but it's a good one. With files priming, you can access the files that are associated with records offline rather than just the records themselves. You simply choose Enable File Attachments when you're configuring the object in briefcase creation. But note that this requires the mobile offline for Salesforce mobile app plus permission, and that must be enabled in the briefcase object settings. Sales Cloud next. So starting with Agentforce, the Sales Development Representative, SDR, you'll see it referred to as in the Salesforce help, now gains more capabilities and is able to automatically reach out to contacts and person accounts, as well as the leads that it could always handle. It also supports additional languages, so the usual FIGS plus J, French, Italian, German, Spanish, and Japanese, but also Portuguese. And you can now test email generation in Agent Builder to check how your SDR creates intro emails, nudges, and replies to prospect emails, etc. Make sure it's doing what you wanted it to do. There's a gap here because there was another feature called Deal Agent, but that didn't make the grade and got pulled a week or so ago. So that's a reminder that until the release actually goes live, you can't guarantee any of these changes will be available. Consumption forecasting now. Deploying the forecasting data kit simplifies consumption forecasting setup, so it automatically creates the data lake and data model objects for standard objects rather than you having to manually go and create them. You go to Setup Forecast Settings and click the Deploy Data Kit button shown on the right-hand side there. In sales planning, you can control who can export and publish quota plans through the Publish Options menu item. And you can also freeze specific columns and headings in quota planning, which, trust me, makes it easier to work with large volumes of data. And finally, in Sales Cloud, some enhancements to emails. So you can include the return address and verified return address fields in user lists, which allows you to identify users who have got unverified return addresses and therefore won't be able to send emails. You can also configure authorized email domains so that basically to demonstrate that you own them, so that users don't have to verify return addresses if they're sending from those domains. And finally, as mentioned right at the start, Einstein Activity Capture can sync emails as activity data. So you can use the activities match emails to records flow to make sure you attach the activity to the correct record. You can choose to capture the entire email, including the body, or just the headers if that's a better match for your compliance policies. And your users can also choose to override the record association that Salesforce comes up with, and also add additional emails events that weren't captured as part of that. And finally, last topic for generally available features, Service Cloud. So starting again with Agentforce. So Agentforce for self-service provides support for common issues for your employees as opposed to customers. You need to create the agent using the employee service template and use the Salesforce supplied topics and actions. You also need a whole bunch of permission set licenses for that, so you're probably going to want to talk to your AE if you're considering using that. Service Planner has been renamed to Agentforce Service Assistant. So reminder, this is an assistive agent. It appears in the case record page and it helps your service team resolve cases with real-time summaries and guidance for steps to resolution that are grounded in your data, in your previous case performance, etc. On cases now, if you want to include the age of a case in business hours in your reports, you can go ahead and do that now without needing to contact Salesforce support. So anything that stops you raising a case is a good thing. And a bit of feature parity that's been outstanding for quite some time now with Classic. You can add the close case button to the case details page and close directly from the case details. So previously you needed to create a custom button. So here we are, just I don't know how many years past Lightning Experience going live, and we finally have that. Email next. The service email summary prompt can now be customized to match your corporate tone and to specify the sort of length of message that works for you. Previously, you just had to go with what it gave you, and then you change the output of that. You can choose to notify senders about errors processing their email to case request, although note that this is off by default. And the hourly single send email limit now includes emails sent from the case Lightning email composer. So that used to have its own separate set of limits, whereas now it's all bundled into a single hourly send limit, which makes things a lot simpler to understand. Messaging next. The new quick setup flow for messaging for in-app and web allows you to create a channel and deployment in just a few clicks. If you're finding the enhanced conversation component menu a bit cluttered, you can hide the option to set an unresponsive customer as inactive. Bring your own channel now supports warm transfers, where the rep taking over a conversation has all the necessary context, which is really handy, so they don't have to ask the customer the same questions over and over again. Most of us don't like that. And there's also the ability to preview images and files. Multi-rep conferencing allows you to loop in additional experts if you need to. So messaging for in-app and web supports up to 5 invitees, third-party channels up to 2. The messaging for web chat button can now support a custom image to align with your brand, and reCAPTCHA v3 is available for messaging for web and in the REST API and websites, but not mobile just yet. A bit more on messaging. If you need to make changes to multiple channels, you can now do this in one go via a CSV file. WhatsApp flows allow you to guide your customers through structured business interactions. It can be quite useful. You no longer need an omni-channel flow to send work to Agentforce. You can simply connect the agent to the channel on the messaging settings page in setup. So a bunch of people have done a bunch of things in the last few months, so they can now undo. So that's nice. And you can keep triggered outbound messages open to see customers' replies. So previously these were closed automatically. Moving on to knowledge, you can gather feedback on your knowledge articles to find out if they're proving useful to anyone. And once you receive feedback, you can assign that to individuals to progress and make any changes as they need to. The first 30,000 are at no cost, but after that you'll have to pay by consumption. And note that once you enable this, you can't disable it. So make sure to test in a sandbox. And you can improve article navigation to ensure you get good feedback on it with the new table of contents component. So simply drag this component shown here with a 1 into any editable part of the article. So for example, on the right-hand side shown here with a 2. And finally, for Service Cloud routing, you can configure which AI agents are visible to each supervisor in omnichannel, allowing them to focus on the things that matter. So previously, every supervisor saw all of them, or up to 10, depending on which was least rather, active agents, regardless of whether they were interested in them or not. When escalating from Agentforce to reps, you can now check availability and give the customer idea of the likely wait time. That's quite helpful. It's always useful. If it's great that Agentforce has this, mega scale, and you can have as many customers being handled as you like. But if you're having to escalate a number of those and no customer service reps are actually available, that's probably not going to be a great user experience. Supervisors can now monitor email conversations between agents and customers in real time to ensure the service is at the required level of quality. And like the Agentforce transfer, you can also show customers the likely wait time when transferring to skills. And you can update a rep's, this is the last one I think is quite an interesting one, because you can update a rep's presence through natural language requests to Agentforce rather than clicking buttons in setup. So you use the default agent, so formerly known as Copilot, and you just type in something like put Maria Garcia on break. It's very brusque, very tough. And I think this is really interesting because it seems like setup is starting to creep in to Agentforce. So rather than, as I say, rather than having to click around pages to fill in forms to check boxes, natural language configuration may be coming. I think this will probably start off with very simple configurations, because anything where the agent has to kind of try and determine exactly what you mean feels a bit dangerous if you're changing configuration off the basis of that. So that brings us to the end of the generally available features. So let's have a quick look at what's coming down the pipe. Reminder that these features may never go GA. We saw an example of that in this release. So don't make purchasing decisions assuming they will. If you log into the Trust site, rather than just hitting it and clicking through, you can now try the personalized Trust. So this is available now. I logged in earlier this week. Once you've identified yourself, you see the details that apply to your Salesforce service rather than just general information on everything Salesforce offers. This currently supports Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, and industries in production only, and Marketing Cloud engagement. But the current Trust site is there as it always was, so don't worry, you're not losing it if you prefer that experience. Agentforce can generate some draft text for your enhanced runtime Lightning Web Runtime sites. You need to enable Agentforce in the Experience Builder, create the agent using the Experience Builder template, then define your brand details as shown to explain, what your company offers, what sets it apart from others, what tone and voice you want the agent to use when drafting. And then on any text block, you can click on the sparkle button, and that will create some text which you can then refine through the Agentforce side panel. The flow get records component can now pull related records as well, rather than you having to wait until a user chooses and then running some additional get records to pull back the related items. So you tick the box to include the related records and choose which types. For each type, you then define filters or sorting, what fields you want to include and how many to get. Then you pick the fields. Then you can click the preview button to see a simple view of which objects and fields you've added. So this final feature is in developer preview rather than beta, which means you can access it in very few places like Developer Edition and Scratch orgs. If you've watched any of the Dreamforce or Trailblazer DX keynotes, you'll have seen the answers from Agentforce being returned in really nice layout, very rich user experience. But if you ask Salesforce how you can do this, they go, yeah, you can't, only we can do that. Well, that's changing. We're going to start being able to do that. So that's very cool. This is the first step in allowing you to display data from Agentforce using custom Lightning Web Components rather than trying to return it in a format that it can do something with. So rather than, for example, on the left-hand side, we've got a complex object just coming back as a list of values, and it really does, if you don't put any effort into put labels in as additional fields, that is literally what you get. It's just a list of stuff that you're trying to figure out, shown in the grab mark to the 1. You can format that really nicely and put it in a card, for example. You can have action buttons associated with it. You can have a much nicer user experience. I'm really pleased to see that. So that's the end of the new features and the betas. So well done, everyone. It's a bit of a marathon, 73 slides I think we've hit all told this time, which is one of the longer webinars. It's been a look at the key features that I think are most of interest to Credera's customers and prospects, but there's obviously no way the entire release can be packed into this time because there's like 700 plus pages of it. It gets larger every time. So head over to these other resources to learn what else is coming. But before I look at any questions raised, a reminder that it's World Tour next week, World Tour and TDX. But I'll be there on World Tour on the 11th of June, doing a bit of booth duty on behalf of Credera, along with Credera's CTA, David Bolton. So we'll be at booth 121 between 12 and 2. So if you'd like to talk more about anything you've seen today or anything Salesforce really, then do pop along. So let's go and have a look and see if we've got any questions. and we don't, and I think that probably reflects the length of this. It's interesting, there's been talk that, from analysts that Salesforce might be neglecting their core clouds in order to focus more on Agentforce, but I think looking at this, there seems to still be a huge number of changes coming on with every release. As we have no QA, obviously if you have any questions, then reach out to your Credera account representative, service manager, or UK marketing at credera.co.uk. And I think that's it. Thank you. Oh, we do have questions. Oh, can't you see them? I can't. No. Can you post them to me then? Marketing, please. Yeah, the deck will be available afterwards. The deck will be shared as a PDF version, and also this recording will be shared. Whoa, the Agentforce Training Center generate test cases capabilities provides surprising values in the field expected response, leading to the result of a test being. So I'm not familiar with the Agentforce generate test cases capability. Are we talking? I don't know who posted this. So I'm guessing this is the expected response from Agentforce. So this, I think, is one of the challenges. I'm not surprised things like this are happening. One of the challenges with testing agents is what actually is a decent response. There's a really good course on this available online from deeplearning.ai. But what they say is that, yeah, this is really tricky. Trying to automate it is really tough. The only way to really automate it is to have another LLM which is trained to know what a good response to a particular request looks like, and then have it analyze and give some kind of sentiment on a percentage quality of that response, which kind of all seems really, well, it is really non-deterministic. So I think this is something probably to keep an eye on. It is likely to be less than perfect at the moment. But it's probably something that's going to get better. But I think it's like everyone's learning on this. I think even the vendors are learning on this, on what the best way to test these things is. Right now, in my personal view, I would say the best way to test any of this stuff is to use humans for it and have them say, yes, this is a reasonable response, or no, this is not a reasonable response. I think that's probably the best you can do. Question from Beach. Hi, Beach. Good to hear from you, man. Is there any news on SLDS2 with regards to experience? Last time I checked, it's holding it back and keeping it in beta status. As far as I'm aware, it's still in beta. I've noticed that you can now enable it in lots of orgs. So when I fired up a Scratch org, that put me into the new theme. The pre-release org was saying that I was previewing a beta theme. I haven't seen anything to say that SLDS2 is going GA just yet, but I guess we can confirm that one. Come and talk to me at World Tour and I'll tell you about it then. Cool, right, that looks like the end of the questions. So yeah, thanks very much everyone very much for your time. Enjoy June. There's an awful lot going on in Salesforce world, so you'll be quite exhausted in a couple of weeks, I think. So have a great rest of the day and have a great rest of the week. Enjoy the events. Thanks all.